Obviously, I do not sit on the Local Government and Communities Committee, but I am cited on this bill, and I have some thanks to give to my opposition counterparts who've walked me through the earlier foothills of this process. I'd also like to extend thanks to the many Lib Dem council groups who have offered opinions in our consultation around what to do on this bill. But I think we shall stand alone tonight in our opposition to the fundamental principles behind this legislation. That is because we as Liberals could never endorse or accept a precept that suggests that ministers or civil servants in Edinburgh who have charge of a much strengthened national planning framework are better placed to understand the needs and aspirations of our local communities than our elected councillors. It relegates local authorities to consultees in Maine and to the grand designs and unfettered powers of this minister, given the powers that will be conferred to them as a result of this legislation. We are often told in this place that we get a piece of planning legislation, a planning bill every 10 years. And, well, this bill is something of a disappointment then. And we've heard from very eloquent speeches across the chamber of the deficiencies that can be found in its pages. It is a bill born of a review, and I make no judgment on the qualities of the people who undertook that review, but it was established with no real objectives. It had no planners amongst its panel, and it had very ambitious timescales, which forced it to leave out a critical analysis of key issues which should have affected it, like the profile of the housing market as it has been in Scotland since 2008, the very significant infrastructure problems which we see in developments that have already been given consent, particularly around transport. And it is on transport I want to rest, because given that we have an ongoing transport review and legislation that will ultimately come from it, presiding officer, I find it astonishing there should be such a profound dislocation between that process and this process. In my constituency of Edinburgh Weston, we have suffered a proliferation of housing development by increment over the last 20 years, which fails to recognise that that these developments are astride two of the most polluted arterial routes into Edinburgh and most congested at that. But it is in the centralisation of the process, in the national planning framework, that we have the most problem. There is a lack of clarity around that, but I'm grateful to the Minister for giving some clarity to the NPF, but it's not the clarity I was looking for. He talks about co-production, but it seems that, yes, Parliament will be shown the national planning framework and given 90 days to consider it, but will have no power whatsoever to amend it. That is an unfettered level of power that we just cannot accept, and relegates local authorities and their local development plans as delivery tools to that end. It fundamentally undermines autonomy and accountability. And I perhaps maybe understand that this SNP administration would like to allow its own administration that they lead in Edinburgh to duck the blame for the monstrous betrayal of trust in places like South Queensferry, with the South Scotstoun development, and in Camo, in the Camo estate, which is under planning, zone for planning right now, that they have no heed for the impact that will have on doctors' surgeries and roads infrastructure, and they have betrayed the people that sent them to that council administration. They will say, don't blame us, blame the civil service, blame Scottish ministers. We are just delivering their plans. Well, I'm not having it, presiding officer. Now, I want to address some of the specifics of the bill. Whilst we will oppose this bill at first principles, we will attempt to salvage it by amendment at stage 2 and stage 3. I will give way to Bob Doris.
Bob Doris.
You say you're objecting to this bill at first principles in relation to centralisation. Does that mean, for example, the Liberal Democrats would scrap all rights of ministers to call anything and ever? Because that would be centralisation as well, in other words, wouldn't it?
Alec Cole-Hamilton.
We have profound concerns at the centralisation of the delegated powers that this bill confers on Scottish ministers. My colleague Mike Rumbles has been uttering the name George Orwell throughout this debate this afternoon, and he's not far wrong. We will attempt to salvage this dog's breakfast of a bill at stage 2. We're very concerned with things like the removal of the main issues report stage, which is seen by all stakeholders as a transparent way of consulting, because there's a pervasive view, Presiding Officer, that once a draft plan has prepared, it is set in stone. I'll give way to the Minister.
I wonder how many of his constituents have approached Mr Cole-Hamilton, who have said that things like the main issues report is one of the most confusing things that puts them off actually getting involved in planning. This is about simplification to get more people involved at all stages, including the formulation of local development plans. Why would he want to keep something which puts many folk off getting involved in the planning process?
Mr Cole-Hamilton.
Well, I'm grateful to the Minister for that intervention, but if his definition of simplification is to delete something entirely, when it is seen by many as an important toehold in the planning landscape, then I think we have a very profound difference of opinion. I also agree with many speakers, and particularly Mike Rumbles, who's intervened several times in this debate, about his concerns about local place plans. They are an attractive thing, but it is not clear how they will interface with local development planning. And indeed, if there is a conflict between certain community groups, one community group and another community group, who develop local place plans for the same area to conflicting ends, it is unclear how those will be carried forward. It needs also to be clear how both the local development planning infrastructure and indeed the newly enhanced national planning framework can be democratically updated. It's not fair just to talk about co-production if there is only one person at the table for that co-production who can influence its change. I also have some sympathy with removing an applicant's right of appeal, although we will watch that debate with interest as we go forward. And I'm also keen, I'm glad very much to see John Muir Trust in the gallery today, that we do need some enhanced protections and designations for wildland areas in this bill. I also want to see something about Section 75 of the original Town and County Planning Act of 1997. All too many developers are quitting the field after developing huge, very profitable developments from which they take the money, only to welch on the deals that the local authorities had thought they had made in terms of planning gain. I think we need to introduce a bond system which toughens that up and gives local authorities teeth to get developers to deliver on their commitments. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I am aware that we stand alone this afternoon in direct opposition to the principles of this bill. I have spoken of the unfettered power it confers on ministers and the concerns that we have in that regard. It is the very antithesis of what we as Liberals stand for, that we believe power is delivered best when it is closer to the people. And we will work towards that end through the resulting stages of this bill. If this is a bill that happens every 10 years, it is a profound disappointment, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank you.
Thank you.